afternoon. Can everybody see that? Has that come through to everyone?
Yes. Yes.
Brilliant.
Okay.
Fantastic. It's time to keep your appointment with Wickerman, the re-enchantment of Scotland through Wickerman tourism. And I've got to say, I'm really, really thrilled that Melody invited me to do this, because as you will see, this is a film that I love, and this is not research. This is just a holiday. So I'll begin with the PowerPoint. I'm going to read the paper. All the references are in the paper, so you can get a draft of that by emailing me. It'll also be in the Horror Studies journal at the end, but I'll let you have a look at the draft because it's pretty much kind of finished. So all the references are in there, not on the PowerPoint. The PowerPoint is just there to kind of guide me through the kind of key bits. So I shall begin. Tourism and pilgrimage are inextricably interwoven through the agentic notion that making any such journey is a performative staged act. Tourism is partly a quest for highly contested authenticity and partly a quest for meaning and communitas. Tourism and pilgrimage for Uri is especially important in the inhuman condition of late modernity, exemplified by the loss of enchantment, the loss of ritual, and the instrumentality of global capitalism. The tourist industry in late modernity tries to make meaning and belonging, but only turns agency and authenticity into a commercial transaction. But this does not stop humans searching. In a paper exploring football stadium tourism, Tim Edensaw and his colleagues use an analysis of comments on TripAdvisor to explore the different ways in which users of these sports tourism spaces interact with and reflect on them in a performative mode. For certain tourists who lack a social spatial connection but nevertheless possess a strong emotional affinity with the club, such visits to stadia during match days can resemble a pilgrimage, a means of cementing their fan identity and developing a greater sense of allegiance. Indeed, Gibson, Wilmin and Hodnack find that fans travelling to the University of Florida to watch an American football game often consider these touristic journeys as pilgrimages to the Mecca of Gator football and the spiritual centre of college football. Similarly, one Manchester United supporter commented, "Old Trafford oozes history. Everywhere you turn is a memory of what makes them the club with the proudest tradition in British football." The spaces at the heart of Edensaw et al.'s research are products of the globalisation of popular culture and leisure, of capitalism in its most Darwinian red in tooth and claw. Enormous buildings that host professional clubs and their tens of thousands of fans, watched or curated and sponsored television screens by millions of devoted fans. Yet even when this leisure space and identity is sold to these fans by the machine of hegemony, some still find in the pilgrimage a way of making meaning that is communicative in a Habermasian sense. Popular culture, then, is as valid as the elite culture in the quest for communitas. There is no difference, then, between finding meaning in travelling to one place or another. Football grounds, package resorts, the Roman Forum, Vienna, Hollywood, all and everywhere else in the world are places where people can choose to find meaning through pilgrimage and tourism, and even if such meaning is considered or constrained, I should say, by the power of others. In this paper, then, I explore how meaning is contested and constructed in online spaces and in my own memory through reflective tourism of discourses surrounding location filming of The Wicker Man, which used a number of places to invent the pagan Scottish island of Summerisle. In the film, Summerisle feels like a timeless place in the inner or outer Hebrides, perhaps, inhabited by smiling but deadly pagans who play folk music, who take part in rituals and dances, and who believe in the power of sacrifice. The actual locations used in the film are well known and have been clearly identified in fan and academic literature. The film begins with aerial shots of the plane carrying Sergeant Howitt passing over the dramatic mountains of Skye. But the rest of the film was shot somewhere else, a combination of places in southwest lowland Scotland, in what is now known as Dumfries and Galloway, with a few shots further north in Plockton, a village north of the railway terminus at Kyle of Lochalsh. I will explore then how fans online make sense of the construction of the film and how that feeds into wider academic debates about horror films and outsiders and Scottishness, Celticness and Gaelicness. I'll then discuss my own pilgrimage tourism to the location sites in Scotland, my week based at Anworth and other holidays to Skye, where we also went to Plockton, and use my own pictures and reflections to argue that while all tourism is a highly contested leisure activity, Wickerman tourism allows tourists to find themselves off the map. It also allows people to re-enchant Scotland and make meaning of Scottish landscape and history, even if the film draws on much of English folklore and music from sources such as Fraser's Golden Bough, as well as the Scottish folklore and music that underpins it too. The fan accounts are situated in wider debates about fan culture and virtual spaces. Fans have a long history of attaching themselves to culture and leisure, from the games and theatres of classical Rome to the drunken revelry in Victorian music halls. Fans have consumed instrumental leisure while shaping their own communicative meaning. But late modernity, globalisation and the rise of the internet have allowed fans to claim space, to claim loyalty to the cultures they love and find others who share their passions and their meanings and their shared myths. The internet has provided a virtual space for fandoms to maintain themselves, subject to the constraints of access and the increasing commercialisation of the internet since the 1990s. The internet has shifted the way horror films and horror fandom are seen by the mainstream media too. In the 70s and 80s, horror films were stereotyped by critics as having little cultural, aesthetic or moral value. Politicians and religious demagogues condemned horror films as video nasties, resulting in some films becoming banned in the United Kingdom and other countries. At the same time, horror films were appreciated and adored in alternative subcultural spaces among fans and makers of goth, rock and heavy metal. With the globalisation of culture to the internet, on the internet, however, horror films have been re-evaluated as being as worthy, and horror fans have found belonging, legitimation and acceptance through information on blogs, on Wikipedia and on social media. The Wicker Man, for example, is found on realstreaks.com, where mainly British locations are identified by the hard work of its hundreds of amateur sleuths. Before I move on to the fan account, it's necessary here to return to a claim I've made on a number of occasions. All forms of identity are social constructions. All communities are symbolic, even if they are mapped onto something ontologically material or spatial. I trace the evolution of this theoretical framework from my PhD and other work from 1995 onward in a paper in 2021. There is no essential Scottishness, no authentic set of stories or traditions that make Scotland or England or indeed Yorkshire or Mongolia. All national and spatial identity formation is negotiated through elites creating invented traditions and imagined communities. Further, communities are imaginary and can operate through symbolic boundaries that are not bound to political hegemony or to the history of a place. My work on whisky tourism, for example, it's a hard job, someone has to do it, shows how whisky fans and the whisky industry try to impose their own meanings to single malt and the Scottish landscape. In my work on Scottish extreme metal bands and Scottishness, I argue that Scottish music in its various forms has been identified as constricting Scottishness, whether a romantic Scotland of bagpipes and heather-coated mountains or the urban Scotland of the Central Belt. For there is nothing essential about Scotland as Scottish identity or Celticness, and Celtic identity is a truth that is clear enough. But this idealised Celtic version of Scotland and Scottishness retains its hold around the world, even as Scotland's liquid and polysemic present is very different from the imagined and fixed past. Scottishness or Gaelicness or Celticness then are performed by Tories and other outsiders, constructed, invented identities that have limited relationships to the landscape, history and people of Scotland. And even the people who live in Scotland and claim Scottish Scottish identity are just as likely to construct and be constructed by these myths. With those words of caution in mind, now it is actually time to keep our appointment with the Wicker Man. At the time of writing the paper, there are dozens, that was 27th of August 2021, for those who care. There are dozens of relevant websites that came up when the term Wickerman locations is searched for on DuckDuckGo. And links are followed on the sites that come up. For this paper, I'm going to discuss 5 of them, as they represent the kind of websites and blogs I'm interested in. The first is realstreets.com, as mentioned above, which relies on pictures added in 2011, with an additional one in 2016 to identify a number of key locations. It does not include the mountains of Skye. The narrative provided by the user uploading the shots includes the explanation, not the most promising start one might find, but Brother Robin, who went on an Wickerman rampage through Scotland, knows what he's doing. The second relevant website is scotlandmovie.com, which I used in my own peregrination to Summerisle. The fan owner of this site, named on the homepage as Doug Hill, makes his claim to be an authentic one immediately. I first saw The Wicker Man in 1973 when it was the B-movie feature to Don't Look Now. Both stuck in my mind ever since, but of the two, The Wicker Man is probably my favourite. Mauled by the production company and savaged by the critics, The Wicker Man has in the years since its release steadily gained a well-deserved cult status. The story of the making of the movie is told in the book Inside the Wicker Man by Alan Brown. The Wicker Man has scenes filmed at Plockton, Skye, Ayrshire, and Dumfries and Galloway. In 2006, Nicolas Cage starred in a remake of The Wicker Man that received mixed reviews from fans and critics. The plot itself has some similarities to the original, but the new version takes on different twists and could leave fans of the original movie feeling like they have took a wrong turn. Much like if someone showed up for a first date and was met with a web conferencing room. So Doug has been loved with the film since its initial screening with the well-known Don't Look Now. He dismisses the LeBoot remake of The Wicker Man and situates himself as one of the serious horror fans who would rather forget it ever happened. I agree with him. It was absolutely dreadful. Doug is so devoted to the film and its depiction of Scotland that it's clearly influenced him to produce the Bigger Film Locations website. For the location of the finale on Burrow Head, where Howard is infamously incredibly burned in The Wicker Man, he says, I camped next to the main Wicker Man location and was rewarded by a fine sunset over the sea. Curiously, given the significance of the hare in the movie, the area abounds with hares. I had several wander closely past in the late twilight. Doug then wants us to know he's tough enough to camp wild, and also that he has an encounter with something associated with an older British pagan mythology. Another fan site is filled with similar discussions of the uncanny feeling of Scotland and of the locations used for Summerisle. This is linked to from Doug's site and is the third relevant website used in this research, Wickerman Pilgrim. The main index shows the fan creator standing at the key location at Burrowhead. On the introduction page, he's wearing a Wickerman t-shirt and says, and I apologise for the spelling and the use of question marks. The guy's clearly a bit strange. Hi there, my name is Martin Griffin. I am 39 from Birmingham, England, and I am the Wicker Man pilgrim. And as you probably gathered, like yourselves, I'm a big Wicker Man fan. It is the best cult film ever. I don't think I will ever get any arguments there, will I? How did it all start? Well, after watching the film for the 100th time, I thought to myself what a great idea it would be to go and visit Summerisle. As we all know that, at the start of the film, it says, "Thank you to the people of Summerisle for the cooperation in the making of the film." So I trot out to my computer and punch in Summerisle in Goggle, having thought it was a real place where people lived. Well, I found out to my surprise it wasn't. But what I did find is that there are quite a few different locations all along the south and southwest coast of Scotland that were used in the making of the film. I'd never been to Scotland before, so I took it upon myself to visit as many of these locations as possible and become a pilgrim to my cause. The first thing to do after reading up on the information provided was to book myself, the wife, mother-in-law and my 2 kids into the Ellengowan Hotel in Creetown, map out my pilgrim route to all these places. As you will see throughout the website, I've been through to most of these places in the past 18 months. It's been brilliant, but don't forget my pilgrimage is ongoing, so keep logging in to keep up with my travels, and I've got to say what a beautiful place Scotland is and all the people who live there. Martin's rationale for the site, while over-enthusiastic and ungrammatical, is playful. He nods to the conceit that the film was filmed in the real place of Summerisle, and he wants us to believe that he believed Summerisle was a real place. He does believe the film is the best horror film. He wants us to know he believes Scotland's landscape is beautiful, even the southwest side of it that stands in for Summerisle. Interestingly, it's the film that's finally made him to make the pilgrimage over the body from the post-industrial city of Birmingham, where he tells us he lives. He's carefully identified each site and photographed himself at all of them, and his entire site is the most passionate and endearing of them all. The fourth site of interest is Finding the Wicker Man, a very thorough, professionally designed fan site that has wonderful location shots interposed with clips from the film and information about the filming. On the About page, they explain a small group of us have undertaken a number of trips to Dumfries and Galloway to find the locations used in the filming of the Wicker Man, and all the photographs of the locations used in this site are our own. Somebody called Michael then responded, "Interesting site. I adore the film, and it's great to get to see the locations. The southwest of Scotland is truly beautiful, and I look forward to seeing some more pictures as the website develops." The site then is engaging with the construction of Scotland and Scottishness through the prism of Wicker Man tourism. The site does, of course, cover Plockton, despite the creators claiming the site is all about the locations in Dumfries and Galloway. The man called Michael does not seem to realise that Plockton and Skye are not in the southwest Scotland at all. The fifth and final fan site is a blog about travelling, which includes one trip to Wicker Man locations called Ellen on Her Holidays. A fan is a woman called Helen, who begins by saying she first saw the original film after watching the remake, which at least is an honest confession. She's not a hardcore, time-served, authentic fan, but she's clearly passionate about the original as Doug or Martin. It took about 4 hours to drive there from where we live near Manchester, with a stop at the independent motorway services at T-Bay, just north of the Lake District. This service is like a cross between a Waitrose and National Trust cafe and a farm shop, and he's always been praised as the best in the UK. On a busy bank holiday, it was absolutely heaving, and we wish we picked the normal services for a quiet life at a Burger King. We checked into our hotel and headed straight out to find the first location, the ruined church at Anworth. This is the location of Roy Moison's grave in the film, as well as where the Maypole scene was filmed with the schoolhouse opposite. On an early summer's evening, Anworth is a beautiful spot, but ever so slightly creepy. We were the only people there, and it was so quiet, just the sound of birdsong and the odd twitching curtain. We were amazed by how quiet this part of Scotland is. In general, away from the main road to Stranraer, there's hardly anyone around, and there's a sense of silence and peace, which we really enjoyed. I'm going to move on now to what we did on our holidays. As I have confessed elsewhere, I was unrepentantly uncool as a child, becoming a huge fan of science fiction, driven by watching Star Trek and Star Wars, and fantasy through reading The Lord of the Rings. As I reached puberty, I was a fan of heavy metal too, as the music seemed to be an extension of the fantastic elements of the role-playing games I was involved in with my friends. Genre fandom and metal gave me identity and protected me at a tricky point in the life cycle. It also led me to horror films. Watching the video of Number of the Beast by Iron Maiden led me through my metal friends to zombie films such as the George Romero trilogy, then the video nasties as I was then 10 in 1982, and videos and moral outrage were both becoming familiar when I was growing up. I love metal, horror, fantasy, role-playing games, and I was shocked at the Christian assault on them. My parents were atheists and I had a scientific mindset. But I was also drawn to the pagan myths, mainly through watching Robin Sherwood on television and reading Slain in the fantastic British comic 2000 AD. I could see Christians attacking paganism, so I felt attached to paganism, or rather the myths and stories encapsulated in my shaky teenage reading of The Golden Bough. I wanted to believe that there was a genuine pagan tradition of death and resurrection written in the British landscape, as well as the cycle of seasons and the story of Jesus Christ. I can't tell you when precisely I heard about the Wicker Man, but trying to see it became an obsession. I heard from friends how it had been deliberately destroyed as it was too close to the truth about the world and its guiding spirits. I found that to be nonsense. Then, on the 8th of May 1988, the 87-minute version released as a B-movie in 1973 was aired as the first ever episode of Alex Cox's Moviedrome on BBC Two. I watched it and taped it, and from that moment it became part of my life. I remember watching the end, waiting for Edward Woodward to find a way to escape, and it never arrived. He was sacrificed because he was a fool, the virgin, the king. I loved it. I loved the way it even said it was filmed with the permission of Lord Summerisle. I wanted to believe this had actually happened. In my 16-year-old mind, reading about physics ahead of my GCSE exams, it happened in some parallel reality, some other part of the multiverse. As I grew older, I learned to love it for its essential struggle, the desperate hope that the sacrifice will work. I also loved the use of British folk music in the soundtrack and the costumes of the mummers. I also loved its history, the story of the problems with the unseasonal February weather on location, and the struggle by its director and writer to get the film released in its original glory. I kept the VHS tape with me for many years and would show it to friends to try to get them to see its beauty, its humour, and its perfect pagan ending. I was never a true believer, but I had sympathy with paganism that still shapes my worldview. Then the film came out on DVD with the version I had seen in 1988 with a restored so-called final cut. I bought it. But the longer recombined final cut still feels strange to me because the original has kind of worn itself into my memory. So every moment and whisper as if it's part of my history. When I read online about the precise locations used in the film, I had to visit them. As a child and teenager, I never had the chance to travel to the Highlands of Scotland because my parents did not own a car. We've been to the east coast of Scotland by train to Arbroath in a caravan, but no further. With my wife, Beverly, I've corrected that. Western and northwestern Scotland feels like a second home to me. And we have explored many parts of it, mainly in one-week cottage lets, sometimes moving between cottages and hotels. We travelled to Skye twice, once in 2005, then again in 2012, not only to bag locations, but to walk and drink whiskey. On that first holiday, we caught the ferry and stayed in the main town Portree and climbed up the Old Manor Store, one of the fairy rock-like rock formations seen at the beginning of the film, when Sergeant Harry is supposedly flying to Summerisle. Seeing it in its usual rain-darkened surroundings is enough to make any Christian feel tempted to be impious. On the second pilgrimage to Skye, I was carrying whiskey samples for one of the staff at the Talisker distillery, and we crossed the bridge to the island. We stayed beyond staffing near the Quirring, another of the brooding mountains of Trottenish, into which I ran up on 2 occasions. We drove back to the mainland to Plockton, just up the road from the end of the railway line at Karl of Lochalsh. Plockton was better known as being the village where Hamish Macbeth was filmed, but by the time we visited, there was no sign of any tourism associated with that Sunday evening television series. This small fishing village had appeared in the Wicker Man as a harbour in which Sergeant Howie seen shouting up at the locals. We identified the correct place where the villagers had been lurking, and I left pleased with myself. Ticking off the sky locations was easy enough to combine with actual holidays in the Highlands and Islands. I was not such a completist that I needed to see the place where the plane takes off from the harbour on the mainland, but I wanted to see all the other locations used to represent Summerisle. That meant we had to go on holiday in Dumfries and Galloway itself. While I wanted to be as close as possible to the location where the Wicker Man was erected and burned, neither of us wanted to stay in a caravan on the caravan site near the actual location at Burrow Head. Looking at the information online and combining it with my own awareness of the topography of the locality, I knew somewhere like Gatehouse of Fleet would be an ideal central spot with opportunities to eat, drink and walk when not visiting the location sites. But what I wanted to do was to stay in Anworth because of the ruined church and the old school used in the film. I wanted to touch the walls of the ruined church from my bedroom window, or at least be able to see it every morning and evening. At the time, the owners of the school offered a holiday cottage, Clacton Cottage, possibly the school teacher's house, that was visible in the film. The cottage website promised red squirrels eating from the feeders in the garden, so we were sold and I booked us in for the following May in 2011. We drove up from Skipton, our hometown since 2007, and took the scenic coastal route once we had crossed the border at Gretna Green. On the other side of the Solway estuary rose the northern fells of the English Lake District. This landscape was and is Scottish because we were in Scotland, but it felt like we were hundreds of miles to the north. Like the Wicker Man soundtrack and the traditions cribbed from the Golden Bough, we seem to be in both England and Scotland performing something entirely fictional. Honest pagans on our way to Summerisle. In Anworth, the cottage owner was polite and did not say anything about the Wicker Man, but I could sense she knew exactly why we were there. As soon as possible, we were exploring the churchyard and touching the ruins and looking back at the school. We took plenty of pictures of the church, but for some reason they were not transferred to the Facebook portfolio Beverly uploaded when we got back home. While staying in Anworth, we took delight in watching the film and spotting Clacton Cottage. It made me shiver and cheer at the same time when the window of our cottage appeared and I looked out into the night. Anworth is a couple of miles from Gatehouse of Fleet, so we walked over to it on the first evening and took photos of me standing at the key location there, the exterior of the pub The Green Man. This had never been a pub and was used as estate offices at the time of filming. The interior of The Green Man was in fact the Ellengowan Hotel at Creetown, along the coast from Gatehouse of Fleet and Anworth. We went there too, of course, a few days later. But standing outside what was then an unused building, I could hear enough the band playing The Landlord's Daughter and see the disgust and lust in Howie's eyes as he stared at Willow. Through the pictures presented here, you can see me performing my serious alternative music fan, putting on various t-shirts. So on this particular holiday, no one stopped to nod and identify any of the bands, which disappointed me because when you're a music fan, you want people to go, "Hey, Emperor, Sister Mercy, cool." Note as well towards the end, as we neared the headland at the end of Summerisle, the weather became typically Scottish for a May bank holiday week, and I had to resort to wearing a black waterproof jacket. The day before we visited Creetown, we went to Kirkcudbright, where Beverly took this picture of me standing outside the location for May Morrison's sweet shop. We then ticked off all the other locations in the town, then drove to the next destination, Whithorn, halfway to Burrow Head. The key location in the town, founded by St Ninian, is the Island's Library, where Howie consults the Golden Bough, which is also seen when children walk past carrying death out to the village. Incredibly, in 2011, it was still in use as a library. We then travelled to Burrow Head itself, at the southern end of what we imagined in our heads was actually Summerisle. Before I describe that pilgrimage, I want to describe the other locations because Burrow Head represents the climax of the film, so it needs to be described last here. The next event, we drove to see Castle Kennedy and Colleen Castle. The latter was used for the exteriors of Lord Summerisle's home, and on the day we realised it was too far to reach it, after we'd spent the day looking around the gardens of Castle Kennedy. Here, fake standing stones were set up in a circle for a naked flame dance. It was then reused for the May Day procession, where Harry, dressed as a fool, is being tricked to his doom. This procession wound around the lake and used the weird landscaping for good effect. And here's a picture of me standing just where they had processed. On the day we went to the locations used in the final scenes, we went in order they appear on the film. So we followed the pilgrim markers for St. Ninian's Cave and reached the beach from which the still sacred Christian site can be seen. This beach is where Lord Summerisle gives a sacrificial offering to the god of the sea. St. Ninian's Cave is in sight and is where Roy Morrison is seen, the supposed victim of the sacrifice. We see her here as Harry sees her from the beach. At the real St. Ninian's Cave, there were votive offerings, small candles and crosses, which made us realise that paganism has a strong, undying influence on the morals and ethics and faith of modern British Christianity. I have a picture of me standing on the beach, but it's not worthy enough to be reproduced here. I'm sorry, apologies. We then walked back to the car park and drove to the caravan site at Burrowhead, where there are 3 locations. On the afternoon we arrived, we could not work out where anything was as a mist had descended. There were plenty of static caravans, but no one around. Then someone appeared as we were trampling along at the headland, walking his dog, and he showed us the way. The first is the location where Harry and Roy came out of the subterranean labyrinth through which they have left the cave at the beach. The choppy water indicates how windy it actually was. The second location we found was the concrete plinth and wooden stumps of the smaller of the 2 wicker men burned on the headland. This was used for close-ups of Harry and was the wicker man that collapses so spectacularly as the sun sets at the end of the film. I have a picture of this, like every other location apart from those of Anworth. Finally, there's a location of the full-size wicker man, and this is me standing between the concrete stumps, feeling as excited as some medieval Christian pilgrim on reaching Santiago de Compostela. So, the pilgrim tourists online want to share with the world their dedication to the quest. They've consumed Scotland and recreated Scottishness in their performances and their peregrinations across the country. And they've performed their rites of passage as determinedly as Lord Summerisle and his pagans when they undertake the May Day parade through what is the manicured lawns of Castle Kennedy. Martin, the fan pilgrim, with his own badly written blog, purely about the locations of a wickerman, wants to imagine he can hear the folk music of the soundtrack when he's in the locations, as he plays that music to us every time a new page loads. He has a picture of himself posing next to a footpath sign that says Pilgrim's Way. Doug, who has the Scotland Movie Locations blog, is keen to prove he's a proper authentic fan of the film so much that he rejects the remake altogether. The fans who've identified with the locations on the professionally constructed Finding the Wickerman site use curated photographs and text from the film to make us think Summerisle is a real authentic place, but also a liminal one, where the fantastical is just out of sight. Even the fans on Real Street have playfully entered into the spirit of pilgrimage by performing, mentioning a brother who's travelled up from the mundane to the numinous. Then there is Helen, the blogger, whose pilgrimage begins with middle-class complaints about how busy T-Bay service station is, and she makes comparisons. She mentions the National Trust and Waitrose, which clearly sets her out as a kind of a bourgeois consumer, and how she wishes she did not do the bourgeois thing and stop him there and supporting its supposedly more authentic Cumbrian fare. But then she visits Anworth and the old school, and she feels as if this real place is in the southwest of Scotland is transformed into something beautiful, creepy and quiet, something as clearly liminal, to keep using Turner's language. My own reflections on my pilgrimage and my pictures have not been presented to the public online for this paper, will be my way of giving this journey into the official record of the public sphere of academic debate. Reflecting on holidays discussed above, I have made more of Sky than the fans who've created the websites. This is because I've always been cheered at the sight of the mountains of the Trustnish Peninsula, whenever I see them being used as a backdrop for some Scottish film or fantasy film. They are incredibly unreal shapes, and ever since I saw them in The Wicker Man, I knew I had to walk up to them and explore them. When the querying were used on some of the earliest official pictures of Jodie Whittaker as Doctor Who, I was the first one raving about it to friends on Facebook. Sky is mountains, moorland and Talisker whiskey, my own shorthand caricatures of my own imagined Scotland. But like the fan pilgrims, I was determined to tick off every location spot and to prove I had been there by saving or trying to save the evidence in the form of the pictures. This is our evidence as pilgrims. We have been there in all weathers and proved ourselves authentic folk horror fans. But my reflections show that I am as desperate as Martin in trying to make Summerisle a real place where I went on holiday, a fictional counterpart to Skye, but somewhere further south. But at the same time, I felt the liminal and the numinous, especially in Anworth, which does feel like it belongs to some twilight world of Celtic gods and goddesses, and not Christianity with its ruined church. And when I stood on the top where the Wicker Man burned, where the concrete stumps still remained left over as some offering to the goddess of pulp cinnamon, I so wanted to say we saw hares and watched the sunset. Like the other pilgrims, I had found my way to the end of my journey and my holiday, and just felt excited that the quest was over. So, although we have all performed the role of the pagan pilgrimage to the real island of Summerisle, I do not think that any of the tourists who visited each location of the Wicker Man actually believe we've actually visited a real place in Scotland. All of us have used the location and our visits and our love of the film to impose our own imagined Scottish Isle of the real and often unromantic towns and villages of Dumfries and Galloway. We all want to believe it's real, just like the Harry Potter fans who turn up at King's Cross to pay money to be filmed pretending to push their trolleys into platform 9 3/4. But unlike them, we want to visit the actual locations and not some Baudrillard simulacra, such as a commercialised make-believe Harry Potter constructed well away from the real platforms where the movies were actually filmed. We want to prove our commitment to the performativity of the pilgrimage by collecting and accurately recording our real-life appreciation of the film locations. Inspired by our imaginary community of pagan Scottish highlands and islands, and ignoring the fact Christianity has a real and long-term influence across these mountains, we breathe new life into these locations by bringing our holiday spending. Plockton and Skye do not need our money, but Wickerman tourism has brought new business to an overlooked part of Scotland. So even without the Rocky Mountains and islands of our imaginations, we still feel we are on holidays in our fantasy Scotland when we go to Dumfries and Galloway. Finally, do any of us actually believe we have had liminal experiences? Are any of us practicing pagans? In the churchyard at Anworth, Beverly and I found flowers that had been left on one of the graves used in the film. I think some of the people involved in the blogs online are genuine pagans. All of us, I think, would like to believe that there was something older than the Christianity that still dominates this crazy British society and politics. Our strange established church with bishops in the house and the monarch still appointed by divine will. The year passes, winter becomes spring and summer, people live and die. These are old ideas that still permeate modernity in the Christian church. So most of us who have visited the locations have a sympathy with the pagan mythology of the film, drawn as it is from incredibly important work, The Golden Bough. I'm certain that all of the bloggers have a sympathy with that mythology and are happy to perform their pilgrimage as if they are actually making a pagan pilgrimage. As for me, I'm an atheist, a secular humanist with a trust in science and a cynicism about all beliefs, religions, myths, and superstitions, and the power they have over humans. Yet it's precisely because of this that I allow myself to be drawn into the performance of the pagan, cheering in the film as the Christian copper burned. So my excitement on the cliff top gave me a liminal thrill of the divine, the numinous, and the mysteries of nature. It did not last, but rewatching the film or listening to the soundtrack can send me back in my mind to the imagined Summerisle in the spaces between Macquarie and Burrow Head. Scotland remains my favourite place to visit for a summer holiday, and I know we will return soon to Anworth, to Gatehouse of Fleet, and I'll stand again where the hares run at the edge of Summerisle. I'll end it there, thanks.